Hi, welcome to HEDGE Gallery. I'm here today with artist Matthew Gallagher, whose exhibition is on view through August 7th. And we're also joined today by Cleveland artist Don Harvey, who is going to be joining in the conversation about Matthew's show. We're going to talk a little bit about the work and welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Don, thanks for being here. We appreciate
My pleasure.
it. Yeah. So Matthew, ultimately, how was it knowing that you were working on pieces that were going to be shown during a pandemic? How did that affect you, and what are your feelings now that the show is open?
It's a great question. It was really difficult to focus, I would say, like
Yeah.
doing the actual work. And I've heard this from just a lot of my creative friends that this is not like the ideal time to be creative. Like a lot of people I know who make art really need balance and safety to make their art. And like it was a big task, but I had the deadline and just really wanted to get it done because we've been planning the show for years now.
Yeah.
So
Over a year and a half.
so it was nice to get it done,
Mhm.
and I do think I ended up pulling through. I had some help from my friends, Noel and Eli, but yeah, it was tough, but I'm glad it's up and it's been going really well, so
Yeah.
that's cool.
I think it's interesting how people say the pandemic has affected their work. Because I mean, like you, I've talked to a lot of artists who find it hard to work, and a few who made work sort of motivated by it. But last night, Susan and I watched a online a theater production by the Red Bull Theater in New York,
Oh, yeah.
and it was like a series of short plays, and then they interviewed the playwrights of each one, and to a person, they sort of talked about how hard it was to get to not get motivated, but just get focused.
Yeah,
Because
Right.
of the pandemic, it's a strange kind of psychology.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Right.
there's this sort of underlying white noise, and I think a lot of creative people are really psychic, and everybody's projecting all of this fear, and a lot of people are in a lot of pain right now too, and I think our brains are antennas, and we pick up on this stuff, so and that goes for everyone. I think is really psychic, so there's this underlying just psychic pain out there, so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's also. I mean, I was born right at the opening of World War II. So that was a world event. But then there were the other wars were a little more limited in terms of the amount of the world they occupied. So this is maybe the first time that in my lifetime, and really in yours, that there's something that is going on around the globe, right? And that's kind of freaky, because that means from this there's no safe place. So we just have to figure out how to make a safe place.
Exactly.
And I think that burrows pretty deeply in your sense of the world you live in.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew, your methods and techniques are, I think, meditative in a way and can be viewed as meditative. I know several people that have seen this exhibition take longer periods of time with each piece because there's such an in-depth process. Do you want to talk about any of that meditative, technique that happens behind the work, and how maybe that is something that others can reflect on if they're able to see the exhibition?
Yeah, there's a few particularly I'm thinking about the encaustics and the solvent drawings, but there's a few of these bodies of work in the show are really based on repetitive processes and gestures,
Yeah.
and just over and over and over again, like in a really in-depth way. So, yeah, I don't know, like, for me, that kind of meditative process is like, I don't know if I would, like link it to like feeling like the calm of like meditating like while sitting and like, for like centering yourself,
Right.
grounding yourself and relieving anxiety. It's like, it's almost like a stamina challenge or something like that, because like when you're drawing like one of these grids that's like, hundreds of
Thousands of lines.
like, yeah, I don't know, like, that can be like a really challenging. So,
So there's this borderline between being meditative but also being tedious and finding that place where the work develops.
yeah, and as I'm talking about it though, like, sitting, like in the traditional, like, meditation sense, it's like really challenging too. So,
It is.
you
And
know,
a lot of people have a hard time calming down or being still.
including myself. So, yeah,
Which this pandemic has kind of forced us to do in a way,
Yeah.
and to maybe rediscover parts of ourselves, especially as artists, that we need to reflect on in order to become or to expand ourselves creatively.
Matt, how does that relate at all to your music?
it's a great question. I think when you're making electronic music, like a lot of it's based on like sequences that are looping, and repetition is like one of the things in music that like sounds good to humans, sounds good to the human ear. So when I'm making a track, like sometimes I'll be listening to it for like 8 hours, like the same 4 bars, like for 8 hours, like adjusting like synthesis values in the increment of like one 127th or something like that. It'll be like, yeah, a very repetitive process, and I think that's how you know when something's good, is when you can listen to the same 4 bars like for 8 hours and you're still not tired of it. It's probably good. So,
It seems like it would be.
but yeah, I'd say that's definitely similar, especially in like electronic music, where you have an electronic instrument that's like, it's literally playing back like the same information over and over. Whereas, you can practice guitar and play guitar, and you can play the same thing over and over for 8 hours, but it'll be a little bit different every time, just because of how complex like your muscles and your brain are.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we know that about drawing too. I mean, you're
Right.
drawing the grid, but every mark is a little different.
yeah,
It's
totally.
kind of freaky what the hand betrays in that way.
Uh-huh.
Well, I was thinking back, I guess, related to process, but maybe not to the question about attentiveness and meditation. But I met you as a student, and from the very beginning, the processes you were involved in were pretty much different than the processes a lot of people were involved in. I mean, you came from music for one thing, and so maybe that maybe if we move towards some of the other work, some of the sculptures or things, that might be a place to pick up then.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's head into the other room.
Okay. Okay, well, I was talking about work that I saw you make as a student, and how from the very beginning your processes were quite different, but you came from a different place too, because you didn't really come to the art department as an artist necessarily. You kind of came as a musician who was interested in art, and so I think that Well, two things. One, there are a number of works in the show, including the ones right behind us, that are still made by a technique that I saw you first using there, which was the kind of snapping of the rubber band, and the other body work I saw you doing. I'll come back to that. The other body was the encaustic pieces, which I think you started doing in an encaustic workshop over a winter term, as I remember.
Yeah,
And I started seeing these odd little. Everybody else was kind of encaustic painting, and then there were these really curious, odd little things laying along the shelves. You know, it was a while before I knew they were yours, I think. But and obviously that technique is still one that holds a lot of interest for you, and you've expanded a lot. I think I told you at one point that the larger ones seem to have kind of transcend the idea of a little encaustic object and become paintings, and I like that. But the snap lines, there is the audible component of that. You know, you're snapping it, and then it's a vibration, and particularly in the two behind us, that seems to also be. You pick that up from the image itself. You know, it's like you can almost hear that. As it comes out. You know, there are a couple in the other room where, as a painter, I respond to what the paint did. You know, but mainly on these, I respond to the kind of vibration of them, and it seems like that kind of openness to approach to technique and materials is really one of the distinctive characteristics of your work. I feel anyway, but you can tell me, oh no, there was something else that you were more interested. You can correct me or amend or take the conversation somewhere else, right?
Yeah, I mean, with these pieces, I think this really takes you back to like the original experiment that I was doing with paint, in late 2011 with Susan, Numbenour, and taking a painting class and just feeling really frustrated with brush painting, and just not getting the results I wanted with that traditional style. So I really wanted to create my own tools, my own techniques. I don't know if that was like a conscious thought at the time. I don't think like 20-year-old me was like, I was 19 then, so yeah, 19-year-old me was like, oh, I'm gonna like make up my own thing. I was like really just, trying to find something that I enjoyed so that I could pass the class. But yeah, I remember when I was in sixth grade, or when I was 6 years old, first grade, Miss Lyons, like we were talking about sound waves, and she was describing how they reflect off of stuff, and how they project, and I thought that was like even at 6, like I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. That sounds like a really dynamic, like cool thing. And I asked her, is this something we can see? Like, can we see sound waves?
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, no. And like, ever since then, I was like, I really want to see that shit. So I, tabled that for 13 years.
Yeah.
And when I was getting into painting, at the same time, like I was taking like some new media classes with Julia Christensen and stuff, and I was putting stuff in speaker cones and having the speaker cones excite material and stuff like that. So I thought, what if I attach paint to like a guitar string and twang a string, and it looks really pretty on the guitar when it's vibrating. Like it's this visual sort of phenomenon. guitar string doesn't really work because it's made of metal, and to make it tense is really difficult. But I started using elastic bands, and pretty much like right away, I still have the first painting I made with it. It's like a little like 6x6. It's like this big. Made it on the dorm wall. We got a bunch of paint all over the dorm. But yeah, I still have that little painting, and I remember being like, "Whoa, that looks really cool. This needs to be elaborated on." So I started doing that, and then I put that down for a while, and then it's back in this show just because I think that looks really cool. So I also I did an exhibit in October 2019, just last year, at H Space, which is run by Eli Gaffel, and that was called Seeing Sound, and it was all projects and like collaborations like based on that concept of like literally attaching materials to sound waves and visually map the way they move. So
I didn't see that show. Did you see it, Hillary?
I did not see that show.
Yeah, but
y'all missed out.
Yeah, we did.
no, yeah. Well, you also, I remember some writing you were doing where you were describing that idea that you could actually, you were saying you will actually see sound, I think you said in that one proposal you were doing, and I wasn't sure.
Oh yeah, for the grant,
Yeah, right.
for the
I
Andy
wasn't
Warhol
sure.
Foundation grant.
I wasn't sure how far that had progressed in actual work. I know it was something you could visualize doing, but I don't know if you actually have done it.
Yeah, so I didn't end up getting the grant, and I just went out of pocket for it, which was rough, but it ended up being totally worth it because of how awesome the project was. And until the pandemic dropped, like I was sort of talking to spaces in like Chicago and Philadelphia and stuff like that about bringing that project over there because it was really exciting to folks organizing exhibits and stuff in those cities. But like just for reference, like the main installation in the room was 2 subwoofers, and we hung paracord, like I think there were like 50 paracord lines going from the speaker cone into the ceiling, and the ceiling there's pretty tall. It's like 15 feet tall or something. So and then I collaborated with my friend Jeff Host, who's this amazing synthesist and electronic musician, and he basically drove the sound and the subwoofers, and he also has these control voltage powered strobe lights that sync to the frequencies that are coming out of the synth.
Wow.
So you're basically, the strobe light you can think of sort of like taking a picture of the oscillating paracord, like every 60 times a second or whatever. And so you get this sort of like live stop motion animation of like these vibrations coming through the chord. And it's basically like a big like standing wave demonstration in like a visual arts format. So I also had some paintings like this in there, and I collaborated with Jacob Kessler, who's a video artist and professor at CIA. And we were doing stuff like putting dry ice in water, and it makes a lot of CO2.
Right.
And it like, putting that in front of the subwoofer that's like doing all this sound pressure stuff, so you can see like the sound wave, like, and then we'd slow down the video, do it in slow motion, so you can see like the sound wave like moving through the carbon dioxide and stuff like that. That was a cool project. So Hillary and Don, this is a wild time in world history, and I was wondering what you guys think like the future is for like the arts in Cleveland, and what changes you might like to see like going forward from here, because we're at this turning point. So.
We are. Well, honestly, I was always hesitant to sell art online I always wanted it to be an experience for our visitors, and it always has been. And so I've never had to push myself into that virtual online e-commerce kind of website and world. But the pandemic took me there, and I realized that being virtually accessible was almost just as important as being reopened and having the doors open. And I think that's part of why we're exploring video and trying to understand how we can communicate what we're doing here virtually. And in a way, I think it's positive. Like I said, I was really hesitant about it because I do believe art is always an experience, whether it's 2D, 3D, or an interactive performance or installation. But I think that this turning point for the art world, especially in Cleveland, may help us broaden our audience, which is very important because the Northeast Ohio region, our regional art scene is so incredible. And being able to reach more people is going to give us more of an impact. So this might be our breaking point. It might be our time. We'll see.
Cool.
That's my hope.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Don?
Well, I mean, what you were saying about all the art resources that are here and all the good art that gets made here, for some reason, in the how many years I moved from Akron up here in 1980. So in those 40 years, the one sort of nut that never got cracked in Cleveland that seems to have in some other cities our size is more exchange with the art world in our neighboring cities. I think, Matt, you have more of that than a lot of artists in the area have had. But you know, it's not that in my experience, I haven't had shows in other cities and been in group shows in Detroit or Pittsburgh or places like that. But it just seemed like, in terms of the gallery scene, that if you showed, well, for example, I had a show in Chicago, and I started getting inquiries from people in New York and on the West Coast, you know, which didn't make me famous, but what it meant to me was that people from other parts of the country were seeing the work there. On rare occasion, as that happened in Akron or Cleveland, you know, that you feel like you have that kind of feedback, and for me, that's often happened when somebody who is a well-known collector in town, who has a piece of my art, will have people from out of town coming through, and then like 6 weeks later, I'll run into that person at a party, and they say, "Oh, somebody was here, and they looked at your piece and said, 'Wow, who did that? I've never heard of that person.'" You know, I mean, so do you see what I'm saying? It's just like, maybe through art being online and that kind of exposure, that maybe that can change a bit. But but I also think that just the nature of art, if that's what we were talking about, has changed too. Because some of the most interesting art I've seen in Cleveland in the last 15 years, but maybe really 10 years, has been on city walls. You know, I mean the murals.
The murals, yeah.
And you know, all over the city, and that's really, I know that's not just unique to Cleveland, but it also means people are thinking about art space and about social space and where the audience is in a different way, and I think that's really exciting.
And how the public intersects
Yeah,
with
that's
the
right.
art world
Right.
and is impacted by it or is, you know, influenced by it.
Right. So what about you?
Well, I think, you know, I've been fortunate to like have like a big like national network of art friends through music. I think that's like sort of the thing that's given me those connections and those relationships and those like deep friendships, because, you know, making electronic music, like my performance setup, you know, first of all, it's just me usually or one other person, so that makes like traveling very easy, and you know, to go and perform music, like obviously you have to drive to another city, and then it's such a social thing where you're meeting tons of people. Um, so I think like that's a big part of like why I've been able to make connections in other places, and also like a lot of people I know that make music, sort of in the underground like experimental community, or you know have their hands in a lot of different disciplines as well. Like you know they'll be visual artists, musicians, dancers, performance artists, like you know, and they'll do all of these things at once. And I think that's like that's something that's really interesting. And you know, if you look around the show, you can tell that like you know I'm really interested in having like a really diverse like set of interests and practices, um, which is interesting. It's a trade-off where you know I find myself like spending 6 months on with music and then 6 months on with visual art. So I'm not throwing all my focus at this one thing. I'm really trying to explore like a bunch of different things, like you know, sort of concurrently, or they're leapfrogging each other. Um, but I think that's like, you know, that's sort of like a antithetical to like a lot of like artists, like you know, classic artists, like you see like, uh, for example, like Kusama or you know someone like that. Like she just been doing polka dots for like her whole life, and she chose this one thing just to do like forever. And I just I think it's interesting that there's like you know people see so much value in that, because and I know you're like this too, Don. Like you really like to do like a lot of different things in your work. You like to explore like a lot of different areas, and I just think it's interesting how like our culture values this like extreme discipline of just you know refining one thing for your whole life over and over and over again. And I have questions about that. I like, you know, I question like why that is, and um, what's viewed as so important about that. So um,
That whole idea of signature style, you know.
yeah,
I mean,
it's
for some people of my generation, or maybe a generation or two of artists earlier, um, that signature style was a way of just being very tightly focused, and keeping that intellectual focus as a kind of discipline, like you know, like a research chemist might stay focused on a given area because for them it kept opening up and opening up, you know. But for other artists of the same generations, I can think of just as many that I think it became a trap. You know, that you know, and sometimes that was commercially driven.
Yeah.
I know of one artist who you probably heard her give a talk. I won't mention her name here, but she gave a talk at Oberlin, and we really admired the work. She had a show in the museum, and we really admired the work was there. And she said, you know, she was showing slides of earlier work, and she said, now does this work all look pretty much like a continuous thread to you? And it did to all of us. But to her original gallery, the gallery that she started showing at in New York, when she started to build a reputation, when her work changed just a little bit, the gallery dropped her. That's not what people come here to get, you know. I mean, wisely another gallery picked her up, but it's like those kinds of things, you know, that commercial pressure.
So we were talking about you know what sort of changes might come like for the art world um, at this turning point in our global world. Um, and there's one really interesting thing that like I think about a lot, like just comparing like the music community and performance environment, and then like the art community and the art performance environment. And this is like a quote from my friend David Russell, and he says that one thing that's like really cool about performance and music and stuff is all the lights are off. So everybody's sort of like, leveled like on this like in darkness, like you can't really see everyone and everyone's sort of like leveled and it's this like sort of ego leveling mechanism that you get is darkness. But one problem, potential problem, I think it can be a problem sometimes with art and galleries and stuff is like there's all this super bright light. It's like everybody's like, sort of like on their like performance game. Everybody's like sort of behaving, yes. And
or maybe acting.
I think it turns everyone into sort of more of an individual, and every individual sort of has like, this like opinion and this persona and stuff. But if we're in a dark room, then, things are different. And that was one thing I thought was really cool about the exhibit I was talking about at HSpace with the sound installation is it was mostly dark. It was very dimly lit, and I don't know, I think like in the future, like I'd really like to figure out a way to have an exhibit that was like, obviously where you have the art and there's some light on the art, but that the rest of the room is sort of dark.
It's something we've discussed.
We have discussed doing this.
Especially with your bronze works that almost need this pin spot focal light
spotlight
to appreciate all of the nuances that are going on, dimensionally, and then having the rest of the gallery dark. Not that people need to bump into things, give them this guiding light through the space, but really highlighting only the work instead of the whole interior of the space.
So I'm a little puzzled there. So even if the gallery was that way,
Which it would be really difficult to do,
well,
but yeah.
it would, but you can do it.
Yeah.
But still, if we assumed that was the case in this show, each of us would still have to look at the sculpture that was highlighted on our own. There's something different between viewing a event or hearing an event in a group, works of art. We use our own eyes, and it's not altogether clear that 6 people looking at a painting are having a shared experience. It's like people bring so many different things. I know that's true of music too, but in an audience, if you're hearing a performance or watching a dance, there's an assumption of a community, and then you hit the lobby and you hear people saying, "Oh God, I couldn't stand that," or somebody else saying, "Wow, I just couldn't believe how good that was." It happens then.
Yeah.
But it's a little different.
With fine art.
Yeah, for myself, some of the most pleasurable trips to galleries that I've had have been with 1 or 2 friends that I know really well, and we kind of do make it that. We go from a work to a work, and there's like a lot of conversation. But I think that there still just is like a whole experiential difference there, and I don't know if there's. I'm kind of an old guy, and I'm stuck in when I became age as an artist, which we're all kind of stuck in the period we became intellectually mature in some way. So that I may just be bringing old opinions to it, but it seems to me still that when I look at a work of art, I need to kind of figure it out for myself. And then I can talk to somebody else about it.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. On that point too, like, you mentioned some of your favorite art viewing experiences or just, you and a friend, like making your way to the gallery together.
Yeah.
You can't really do that at an opening, where there's like dozens or hundreds of people, and
that's
people
right.
are like, Don, hi Don, like, how are you? And it's always,
It's very social.
yeah, it's super social, and humans are social, and that's beautiful. But at the same time, like you mentioned something, I think it's true is that everyone's going to have like a really individual sort of experience with the work that I don't know. You make an interesting point, and openings are really cool. But I feel like a lot of times folks come to the opening and they don't come afterwards,
I know.
and
But everybody will say, you don't go to an opening to see the art.
Right.
Because you can't see the art, right? So you would think
Right.
if you came to the opening to see the art, you'd come back to see the art.
Mhm. Yeah, it's definitely my favorite way to interface with work, as well as to just sort of go during gallery hours and check stuff out. Like when Bill Busta's gallery was up, it was like just a few blocks from my house, so I'd like just hang out there like all the time. That was really nice. And I wish that happened more.
Well, maybe it will.
Maybe it will, right?
Maybe
because-
we're moving out of a time where these large crowded events, whether they be gallery openings or concerts,
Mhm.
you were mentioning like Live Nation concerts earlier and how maybe that's not the future. Maybe
Yes.
that's not how we experience
And that would be
what we
cool.
love anymore. Yeah. And so that the creative people and the creative community actually gets to evolve into something that's more appreciated
Mhm.
on a different level.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because these big like dinosaur reunion tours and stuff, like I think they take up a lot of space and resources that could be going to other more important things. So
Yeah, local musicians, local community projects. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. We shall see.
Well, we'll hope. I think it's my hope anyway that we don't try and think that whenever the pandemic is over, we just
Go back
go
to
back
normal.
and replace. I think
Yeah.
in so many parts of society, we're recognizing that'll never be again, and I'm sure in the creative world it won't ever be either. But we're creative, so we won't lament. We'll figure out another